In this video, I'm gonna go over the 10 biggest mistakes that I see people make when they just start a diet. Now, if you make any of these mistakes, your success on that diet may not be successful. Let's go ahead and break down exactly what these mistakes are and what are some things that you can do to not only make sure that you don't do these things, but that you have a better strategy put in place to make sure that your diet is successful and that you see the results that you're aiming for. What's up guys, I'm your coach Eric Bowling, and let's jump right into the video. Now the first mistake that I see people make when they just start out on a diet is that they don't really have a good knowledge or a good understanding of calories and macros. If you're just going into a diet and you just think, hey, I'm just gonna eat less overall, and that's really the only thing that I'm focusing on, and hopefully the weight starts to come off, then you're gonna be running into a wall pretty soon. The second biggest mistake that I see people make is that they fail to clean up their environment. And what I mean by that is simply, if you're just relying on willpower alone, your diet's not gonna last that long. Now, you guys might be thinking, well, this is really challenging. Like, what do I do if I live with people, my family, I have to cook for my kids, everyone's on a different meal plan or different meal structure. How do I make this successful? There's a lot of good research that has come out that has shown things such as the more easily accessible food items are, the more likely you are to go to get them. You might be surprised, but this tactic actually works extremely well. Keeping things away from you, hiding them, covering them, so let's say you have a bunch of bags of chips. If you can open up all those bags of chips and just put them in a non-see-through Tupperware, you'd be surprised, but guess what? That is one little strategy that you can use to make sure that you're not seeing those things and everyone else can have their meals and you still benefit from it because you're not seeing them. Now, the third thing that I see happen quite a bit is that people weigh themselves too inconsistently. And one of the ways that you can go about weighing yourself is just making sure that you create a consistent routine. So if you wake up every day at 6 a.m., well, after you use the restroom, you should step on the scale, track your weight, and then after the course of a week, you compare your weekly average, so your week 1 weight with your week 2 average weight. But if you don't do that, you might be finding yourself weighing yourself after meals, weighing yourself at night, skipping days altogether, and then you're comparing how Monday looks compared to Saturday, and that's not necessarily going to reflect any type of progress. You have to understand that adaptations take a while, and your weight is fluctuating on a daily basis. If you don't really understand how your weight can fluctuate so much, I made a video that you can watch right here, so just make sure that you open that one up in a new tab and save that one to watch after this video, because it'll help you really understand why weight fluctuates as much as it does, and as tough and stressful as that actually is. Once you kind of get a better understanding of why your weight is fluctuating, it's gonna help you feel a lot better that no, it's not that you're not making progress, it's just the way that your body is. Now, the fourth mistake that I see people make quite a bit is that before they even begin, they're already thinking about cheat meals. And you just have to think about it. If you're gonna be starting a diet and you're gonna be cleaning up your nutrition plan, it's not that there's anything wrong with, having a meal out or doing all that stuff, but the more rigid you can be in the beginning, the better results you're gonna see initially. And if you're starting to bring in foods that you wanna get rid of every single week, well, those foods are gonna spike your weight up quite tremendously. The other thing is when people think about cheat meals, they're not just thinking about one meal, they're thinking about like cheat days. And if you don't track your calories and you're not really being, consistent with how you're going about your diet, especially when you just started, you're gonna start seeing no progress. And this can be one of the things that really defeats people, which is really what takes us into our next point, which is kind of tied in with this one, is that they're not accounting for the calories that they're consuming on the weekend. So if you're like most people who are bringing in cheat meals or cheat days on the weekend, you could be in a calorie deficit Monday through Friday, and then on Saturday when you decide to go out and have pizza and kind of just binge and not follow your plan, you could technically eat as many calories as you were in a deficit for the last 5 days in a single day, hell, even in a single meal. And what that would do is that would make sure that you're no longer burning fat and now your weight is pretty much consistent. So just a couple days of bad eating can definitely ruin an entire week of dieting. And the reason why this can be extremely stressful for you is it doesn't negate the fact that you had already put in a lot of work and you were already doing everything you could to avoid foods just to then see no progress at the end of the week. And this is why what I really want you to focus on is if you are going to implement something like a cheat meal or you are gonna have a cheat day, you need to account for the calories you're consuming. One way that I really like to explain calories and when you should track is you should think about things on a spectrum. The higher quality food that you eat, the less you need to track. The lower quality food that you eat, the more you need to track. And the reason why is because high calorie foods that are extremely palatable and low nutrient profile, those calories can really sneak up on you without you noticing them. Because they're not as satiating as high quality foods, and because the calories are as high as they are, if you're not tracking, you might overeat by 2,000 to 3,000 calories and still feel hungry. While on the other hand, if you were to have something like a nice steak and some vegetables, well, you might only consume 500 or 600 calories, but you might feel extremely stuffed. And the next thing that people don't really consider is the fact that it's gonna take their body quite some time to adapt. So if you're quitting just after the first couple weeks because you're not seeing the changes necessary, well, then you're not really thinking about how the body works. You see, we don't get fat over the course of a couple weeks. It takes us months and years on end to accumulate the type of weight where we're then like, hell, I need to start working out. I need to get my life back in order. And the same thing is true when it comes to dieting. While you can drastically reduce calories and start training hard and making sure that you're doing everything you can to start seeing the weight drop as quickly as possible, you have to remember that long-term success is going to require long-term and consistently doing what you're doing. It takes time for your body to see change. And you have to remember that your body is not dumb. Your body is going to conspire against you by trying to do everything it can to bring back homeostasis. And if you've been a specific weight for the last 5 years and you think that you can just change that in 8 weeks, you're kind of fooling yourself. You see, the body is going to work with a bunch of different things, such as like your hormones, your brain, and other things to try and make sure that it returns you back to where it was most comfortable. So this is something that you have to remember. There's a lot of research that shows that long-term success on your weight loss, when it comes to like your maintenance plan, you have to just do it long enough. So one thing that I always suggest in terms of the bare minimum amount of time required to see some type of results, it's gonna be about 8 to 12 weeks before you really start to see your body change. Now, when it comes to long-term success, you should probably take at least a 1-week break from your diet and from training about every 12 weeks. So dieting for more than 12 weeks does not seem to be such a successful strategy. In fact, a lot of research has shown that taking temporary diet breaks about every 12 weeks will actually ensure that you have longer-term success on your program. So if you guys can consider that and think, okay, I'm gonna go 8 to 12 weeks as hard as I can, and then I'm gonna give myself a 1-week break where I can just relax, get back to normal life, and then try to focus on doing those things in intervals, you're gonna see a lot more success in the whole approach. Now, another big problem that I see quite frequently is that people start with their calories too low. And this is something that you really have to consider. Now, I have a free ebook for you, okay? It's 8 weeks of training and nutrition. And in that ebook, I kind of explain on the nutrition page when you're trying to figure out how many calories you should be eating, I kind of explain that once you figure out your calories, there is a lower limit where you shouldn't be taking your calories any lower than around 10 calories times your lean body mass. If you take your calories any lower than that, there's no more room before you start to lower your metabolic rate and your body starts to lose muscle. So you wanna make sure that you start with the bare minimum deficit required to see your weight start to go down. And then as the weeks go on, you can slowly start to bump that calorie deficit up a little more. This is really where you're gonna start to run into problems when it comes to hunger and your appetite being out of control. And this is really where people start to fail their diet because they just started way too low. And this is the other thing which takes us into our next point. A lot of people, when they start a diet, they're just focusing on limiting their portion control and they're not really looking at prioritizing and maximizing their macronutrient ratio. When we look at all diets across the board and we find what is the main factor that is contributing to them being successful, it's really coming down to the protein intake and calories. So if you're starting a diet, you do have to make sure that the calories that you are consuming, that they're primarily coming from protein. You see, beyond just reducing calories, The more you prioritize protein, the more food you can actually consume. The reason behind this is because protein has a high thermic effect. About 30% of the calories that you consume from protein are actually burned up in the digestion process. Now, the reason why this is very beneficial for you is that means that you can actually consume 30% more of your calories from protein while still actually being in the same deficit than if you were to get those calories from something like carbohydrates, for example. Another nutrient that a lot of people don't really consider is their fiber intake. Fiber also has 30% TEF, which is the thermic effect of food. So protein and fiber in conjunction can really help you to not only feel satiated, but to assure that you're getting enough volume of food while also being in a calorie deficit with not really noticing it. You see, when people prioritize just limiting their food intake and they're consuming very low protein and their diet is mainly just carbs and fats and very low protein, this is really where you can run into issues when it comes to how satiating it is. Another thing that people fail to realize with point number 9 is how adaptation works. You see, it takes the body time to really focus on understanding what it is you're trying to accomplish. And the reason why I bring this up is because it's the same idea of training. You know, if you go into the gym for the first week and you start training, you're not going to notice any type of change in your body. You know, you might be sore. In terms of strength gains or how your shape looks, nothing has really changed. Second week, no change. And you kind of get my point here. Why would we think that diet is any different than that? And this is one thing that you guys should always consider, is that it takes time. If you've seen people who've been going to the gym consistently, you probably start to see the results after month 3. And then after a couple years, then you really start to see the change taking place in their body. Nutrition is very similar. It takes time for your body to figure out what the hell are you trying to do. It's the same idea. If you were to take someone who is extremely healthy and they eat a Snickers bar once, they're not all of a sudden going to be unhealthy and diabetic. But if they do that consistently for enough years on end, and that's what the majority of their nutrition looks like, then over time, the body starts to say, well, this is just what you've been doing, so this is how we're adapting. So when you start a diet, give yourself enough time. You have to understand how adaptation works. And now point number 10, the very last point that I want to make, which is the most important one of all, is being overly dogmatic with your food choice. Now, there's nothing known as a good food or a bad food. Now, earlier we talked about how fiber and protein can be very beneficial for you, but you'd be surprised that there are some proteins that can actually cause an autoimmune response in some people. The same thing is true with fiber. People who have diverticulosis might not actually be benefiting from having high fiber. And you see, this is actually something that's really interesting. So while one food may be good for one person, it may not be good for another person. Just to give you a little story about me personally, I actually have a very hard time digesting raw vegetables. In fact, if I eat something like Brussels sprouts and they're not cooked to the point where they're no longer nutritious, I will feel like someone takes a knife and is just stabbing my stomach. So there's a lot of carbohydrates and a lot of plant foods that I can't personally eat. And that's just how my body is. So for me, having a lower fiber count and actually limiting my cruciferous vegetables is actually something that I need to personally do with my own nutrition, and that's the only thing that can really work for me. So every single person is individualized. So you should never look at one food and say, that's a good food and that's a bad food. Now, while we might look at something like a donut and say that's a bad food and a piece of chicken breast is a good food, if that's something that's going to help you stick to your plan long term, then that thing may not actually be that bad. Whereas on the other hand, if you were already 1,000 calories over your nutrition for the day and you said, well, I'm still technically low on protein, so I'm gonna go ahead and eat another 12 ounces of chicken, that in that context, that chicken may actually be doing more harm than good. So you have to remember, while some foods in and of themselves have a better nutrition profile, we can't necessarily say that food is good and that food is bad. It's all about the context that it exists within. You see, the majority of studies show that the more flexible people can be with their nutrition post-transformation, the longer they see success. People who are rigid, they just don't see that type of success because they can't stick with it. And this goes into the whole idea of the not trying to be super dogmatic. Because if you think carbs are the most evil thing ever, and you limit carbohydrates and then you have success with your weight loss, you might create a very bad pattern of thought where you think that the majority of your success was due to the fact you didn't eat carbs. Then that might make you really over dogmatic and think, well, I can't have carbs anymore because it was removing them that made me lose weight. And if I eat them, that's going to be the thing that makes me gain weight. And you see, instead of looking at it as, well, the reason I lost weight was because while removing carbs lowered my calorie count, that's really what you're not seeing. And so if you were to introduce carbs, you just have to remember that, yes, carbs are calories. So as long as you're counting those calories, carbs can be something that you can bring back in. But when you become over dogmatic about food groups or food choices, then you can really run into some problems. Now, what I want you guys to do is just go ahead and leave me a comment below and let me know. Did you fall for any one of these 10 traps? Or do you know people who fall for these traps? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And look, that's it for today's video. If you guys enjoyed this content, go ahead and let me know by leaving a like, and make sure that you also share this with anyone you know who could really benefit from this type of content. And last but not least, if you guys really want to see more content like this, just go ahead and let me know by hitting that subscribe button, and also make sure that you hit that bell icon so that you're notified for when these videos drop. And that's it for today's video. And as always, guys, stay strong, and I'll see you next time.